Hey, what is up, everyone? It's Theguyhere, and welcome back to another episode of Themindhere, the bi-weekly podcast where I talk about new knowledge I've learned, projects I'm working on, and current events. Topics may be random, but I hope that with each episode you can come away with a fresh perspective on the universe. Welcome to all of you who are here for the first time. If you like my content and want to see more, please consider subscribing. All right, so this episode is going to be a tad bit short, but I'll talk a little bit about two important things I wanted to address today. So the first thing is from one of the comments from my previous videos, previous episode, where I mentioned how it was pre-recorded because I was attending a hackathon, and they wanted to know what was my experience? So that's a good question, and I'll talk a little bit about that here, just to describe what I felt going in as someone with a background in some coding, but not too much. And also, I have never been to a hackathon, especially a virtual one, so I wasn't sure what to expect. So this is just from my experience of how it went. And I guess probably should start off with the days leading up to it. So going into the hackathon, I sort of wanted to be prepared in some ways. I mean, I didn't really know what to expect, and most of the actual planning for what you're going to code and whatnot has to be done during the hackathon anyways. I couldn't do too much, but I wanted to, brush up on some skills. And I came in and I thought, okay, I wanted to do something on blockchain technology. And the partner that I found for this project was also interested in blockchain technology. So I brushed up on Solidity, which is a programming language on the Ethereum network, but that wasn't necessary, as I later found out, because it was quite a bit too complex, and I came in with high expectations of what I could accomplish during the 48 hours that I had. I just didn't know what was feasible, so that was something that I didn't foresee, and I wasn't sure what to plan. For the most part, I think with hackathons, you can pretty much, unless it's specifically telling you, the hackathon tells you this is the project we want you to do, then you can honestly just go into it with what you know and sort of learn along the way. That's part of the experience too. Besides the winning part of a hackathon, you can also learn and just get to network, and there was a whole lot of things that was learning oriented with this hackathon especially. So maybe for ones that are specifically designed to, get out some functional product within a certain amount of time, and it's super high stakes, that might be different from this, because this one was more beginner oriented and you could learn a lot. There were workshops and a whole bunch of categories, and it was pretty general. So that was one difference with this hackathon that might be different in other places. That and it was virtual. So that means most of the activities were virtual through Zoom, which it was still fun. Better than, I guess, being by yourself compared to, by yourself during the pandemic or locked away. But it's still not as much fun as something in person, I would think. But it was still a good effort, and I thoroughly enjoyed the process, and I thought it was pretty well executed. But so leading up to it, I guess I tried to prepare in some ways. One thing I did was also the night before, I heard stories about how people, just go through an entire hackathon without sleeping, dedicated to the project. So I was like, okay, I'll probably get some extra sleep going in. So the day of the hackathon came in, and I was actually, I had to take a test that day. So that wasn't too fun, but it was also not a high stakes hackathon, so it was okay. And met up with my partner. We got started thinking about what we could do, and I quickly realized that the scope had to be drastically reduced, because I like to reach far, but sometimes that means the schedule has to be stretched out, and we couldn't stretch out the schedule here, so I had to limit scope as much as possible. So what we came up with for this project was an demonstrator app that can teach people what a blockchain is and how it works. So it was basically a desktop educational application. So that's what we decided on, and I was working on the front end of that. Now, I came in here with some web dev knowledge, so I thought I could use that, but then I realized, wait a second, I don't want a browser, and that's a lot of the web dev technologies use a browser. So I had to look in and research a lot of things. And it's really painful when you have a time limit, but you aren't really getting any work that's tangible done. So the first like 8 hours or so of the hackathon was me just researching what I could do, which it was sort of hard because I had to decide and then try out some frameworks and then realize that it wouldn't work. And it just felt like I wasn't going anywhere. It was sort of demoralizing. But it was also part of the learning experience, and I learned how different desktop applications come about. But because I wanted to use something that I was familiar with, and I was familiar with the web dev technologies, I wanted to use something that used that. And the framework that I used for making a desktop application using web dev technologies was Electron.js, which basically so sort of just uses like all the normal web dev stuff, so HTML, CSS, and JS, JavaScript, and it puts it together into an application that you can just use on the desktop. But so I had to search for that, and then I also had to search for something that would work with this, because the normal stuff, I couldn't use things that were normally used with like a web server, for example. It had to be something that I could pack together and put into an executable file. So that was an issue there, and a lot of research going into it. The research part can be fun, but because I guess I take some time to do that research, any time that's not spent actually coding can feel a little bit painful in the process. But it's also important to make sure you start with the right thing, because if I didn't do that research and I went down the wrong path, then reworking that would have been a nightmare to do, especially with a time constraint. So spending that upfront time to do that knowledge research is, I think, important, because it can really smooth things up, smooth things out in the long run. But it was something that I learned that it was painful, but also a necessary evil. And I managed to not pull an all-nighter, but the final night that I had, so it was 48 hours, so 2 nights. The final night that I went through 3 hours of sleep, which it wasn't too bad, just because I had plenty of sleep beforehand going in, and I could handle less sleep for some short amount of time. So it was an experience, and it turned out all right. I was surprised that I could build a desktop application, so I was decently proud of what I could do with the front end. My friend built a demonstrator blockchain using Python from like the back end of things. So that was our project, and at the end, there was an award ceremony just to show about different projects, and I saw a lot of really cool projects through the demonstrators, through the gallery that we could look at, and it sounds sort of bad. I guess I really didn't want to feel like this, but when I looked at it, I thought like, wow, my skills are definitely not up to par, because a lot of the projects that people built were super amazing and looked very professional, very functional in some ways. In some ways I felt a little demoralized, but I also had to remind myself that I didn't have that much knowledge coming into it. Everyone is at different skill levels for this, and it's okay that I might not be even like I might not be good at coding at like that level or something, or maybe they just had a good teamwork or something like that. But it shouldn't be an excuse for me to drop it. If I truly do like coding, then even if I'm not great at it right now, there's always a chance for a catch-up growth. You know, when you're interested in something, you can start learning super fast, putting in all that energy and that dedication. So after the hackathon, I decided it was a good experience. Depending on what comes next, I have at least some knowledge of how a hackathon works. So in the future, if there's something that I'm super interested in, I might take it. But otherwise, a hackathon takes a bit of time, like a day, 2 days or more, just to block out for the hackathon, because if anything else comes up, that is eating into the valuable time you have to build something. So in the future, if it's a good hackathon, if it's a hackathon that I think that might be worth taking a look at, or if it's worth my time compared to like other things, or if there's like no schedule conflicts, then for sure I might attend a different hackathon. But it was a good experience. I thought I learned quite a bit, And I also opened my eyes to the different communities and also the different people that attend hackathons. So that was something that I wanted to share. If you think this is something that's interesting, by all means, go ahead and like explore. You don't have to take a hackathon super seriously, right? Go to like a beginner friendly one, and you can almost schedule it in with your normal day. And see how it works for you. You don't have to stay up 24 hours to do something, to code a project. So that's, I think, something that it might shy people away, but I think that it shouldn't be, because although it sounds technical, you don't have to have technical knowledge. People will guide you along the way. And that's that's what I wanted to share about my hackathon experience for Hackathon 2021. Now, the second thing that I wanted to share, touch up real quick about, is information curation versus sources of truth. So if someone asks you, what are your different social medias that you visit, or what are your, sources of truth that you look at, you might say, oh, okay, maybe I follow this YouTuber, maybe this Instagram influencer, other social media influencer, maybe, I watch CNBC News or ABC News, whatever it may be. You watch some news or whatever. Those are my sources of truth. That's what people normally refer to them as. But I want to pause a little bit here and question the term source of truth and differentiate that between information. Sources of truth, so truth and information, or let's say data and information, that might be more accurate. They sound like similar words describing similar things, but for example, in project management speak, data is something that's like raw information, raw data that you collect. So like metrics based off of some measurements that you take, maybe temperature readings, or maybe survey data that you take and gather, and that stuff. That data, that sort of like the raw information, whereas information in terms of like reports or something like that, that's when you take the data, someone has taken that data and processed that themselves. They've found different patterns, they've looked at it, and now they put that into another packaged form so that it's easier to consume. But we have to keep in mind that someone has pre-processed that for you to consume. So the difference between data and information is that one is the unprocessed, the raw stuff, the empirical evidence, and the other is something that has been processed by someone. Even if it's maybe algorithmically generated or something. Remember, someone had to develop that algorithm, and from that development process, they have their ideologies, biases put into that algorithm. So keep that in mind when we talk about data and information. Now, so data and sources of truth, why am I questioning this? Because when we take a look at all the sources of truth that we have throughout, maybe it's your friend that knows quite a bit. Maybe it's that YouTuber that you watch quite a lot, or maybe it's something that's just on mainstream news or whatever, the Washington Post. We tend to think of that as maybe sources of truth, and sometimes they might claim to be the most like trustworthy source of truth out there, but we have to keep in mind that they can't really be sources of truth, because all they're doing is bringing some information that they've decided was important enough to display. So when we talk about maybe a YouTuber, they're putting something out there that they thought was important enough to display to you. If someone posts on a social media something, they had to choose between several other sources, not several, like maybe hundreds of millions of different sources of truth, of data that they could present, but they had to choose something. So what they're doing is they're curating information to present to you. So curation is the process of selecting from something and presenting it. It's just like the selection process. So curation of information, and then they're presenting that curated information to you. So if we think about it, right? News outlets, they have a whole lot of data that they could report in like a 1 hour segment or something, but they have to sort of slim it down because you can't put everything in a 1 hour segment. But by the selection process, they have curated the information they present to you. And sometimes that curation can lead to maybe some misleading information based off of partial truths that are presented. And sometimes curation could even be presenting you non-truths or things that are sort of just, they're fabricated. It could either be in entertainment and therefore fabrication is sort of part of the process, or it could be in a malicious intent and fabricated to either invoke something or to stir up some sort of reaction or get some sort of action that they want. So curation of information should be differentiated between that the source of truth. And when we keep in mind that everything that we look at is essentially curated because someone has pre-processed the data to present to you, then we start to think about, okay, so rather than saying, okay, my source of truth is more truthy than your source of truth, and therefore you are wrong in terms of black and white, which are, it's easy to think in that way, and it simplifies a lot of things, but that simplified reality isn't reality. And when you have a reality that doesn't reflect reality, when you don't look at empirical data and evidence, then when you disconnect from reality, everything will start seeming super strange and supernatural because your model of the reality that you've made no longer reflects the actual reality. Now, back to what I was talking about. When you have, when you realize that all the media that you're consuming is curated information, they are information curators. You then start thinking, okay, so instead of just this is a source of truth, we start thinking about, okay, what sources of truth did they have access to? Who is presenting to it? And we're asking what kind of biases do they have? What kind of background may they have? What sort of events happened previously? What organization are they part of? Maybe a group wrote this piece. What was the group dynamic of this? What are the circumstances and what a whole bunch of different contexts that put together and created this curation of information that was packaged and sent to you. All of that is important, and that's sort of like the metadata in the information package that was sent to you, the curated information, because not only are we looking at the content and questioning the contents itself, whether it was from truth or whether it was presented in a misleading way or whether it was fabricated, but also looking at what motives were behind this, because chances are we aren't able to know a lot of these things with whether they are fabricated or not. But if we look at the metadata of this information, so the background of the people that wrote it or something like that, then we might be able to know more and gain more insight, maybe see more patterns from the different information that we can collect, and just overall better inform ourselves, making sure that we are making black and white decisions and just taking an oversimplified view of reality. So keep in mind that distinction. You are looking at curation of information. I am presenting to you curated information based off of what I think. So take everything with a little grain of salt. We don't want to question the actual truths that may come from studies or experiments, the empirical evidence. That is actual truths that were collected. This is the raw data, and raw data is hard to process, which is why curated information is a lot easier to consume because someone has done the work for you. But because someone has done the work, they might have done it in a way that might not actually align with what you value or what you think is right. So keep that in mind. If you start thinking of things in terms of just like everything is a truth and my truth source is better than your truth source, then that also does injustice to real sources of truth. And when we start mistrusting actual empirical evidence, then our models begin breaking down. Everything will become more supernatural because we are becoming more disconnected with reality, with the lack of trust with the empirical evidence that is needed. So keep all that in mind. It was a lot, and I just sort of spewed out my little rant about this, but it's something to think about and to keep in mind when we talk about, the media that we consume and the information that we consume. Hopefully that got you thinking a bit. All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you all for all the support you have given me throughout this process. If you found this episode or even this podcast to be inspiring or it evoked something that you thought was interesting in any way, it would mean a lot for me if you shared this with your friends or coworkers who you think might benefit from this also. Thank you so much, and take care, stay humble, and we'll see you all in the next episode.